No? No humming?
I got 7 o'clock. Okay. I've got 7 o'clock, so we'll call the committee of the whole meeting to order. First item on the agenda is roll call.
Rusato?
Here.
Atack? Here. Stark? Chansett? Wolf?
Here.
Salvati?
Here.
Brown?
Here.
O'Brien?
Here.
Callahan?
Here.
Meitzler?
Here.
Malay?
Here.
Ewer? Cerrone? And McFadden?
Here.
Okay, got a quorum. Next item is item 2, which is items removed, added, or changed. We have just one item. We're going to move item number 6 up to behind matters from the public. I think that's all we have, isn't it, Laura?
Yes.
Okay. Item number 3 is matters from the public. We have no public here tonight, so nothing there. So the next item then will be, per the change in the agenda, item number 6, which is the discussion on the results of the speed study on the South Batavia Avenue from Millview Drive and Main Street. And this is City Services, Alderman Wolf.
Thank you. This is, was this memo sent out to everybody to show what the existing prevailing speeds were on 31 south of Main Street down to Millview, and go right into whatever Gary's got for us.
Sure, thank you. If you recall, staff was asked to look at speeds on, well, asked to address the issue of speeds on both North and South Batavia Avenue. Committee had directed the mayor, or authorized the mayor to send a letter to IDOT concerning this is kind of the outcropping of all the pedestrian crossing discussions. Send a letter to IDOT regarding extension of the speed limit further to the north on the north portion of Batavia Avenue, which we requested that they extend 30 miles per hour north to North Avenue, which they subsequently did. And we've since learned that that was considered to be a minor change at the staff level amongst IDOT. It was really only moving signs about a block and a half, 2 blocks, and it wasn't anything more than that, so that was something they could do at their staff level. Staff was also, our staff, us, not IDOT staff, we were asked to then look at speeding on South Batavia Avenue from Main Street all the way down to Millview. Back when I first started here in '08, it was about 2010 or so when that whole stretch, the speed limits were lowered. It used to be 45 once you reached about the curve there by the cemetery, and then now it's all 40 down to Millview, and then it picks up beyond south of that. But we did go out, we did place our counters, which also take speed throughout a 24-hour period on these various blocks, and Rahat presented the information then in this table on the second page. From Main to Walnut, the posted speed limit is 30 miles an hour, but in that 24-hour period, we found average speeds, and he's got them listed there, but roughly around 10 miles an hour over. So there's an acknowledged speed issue in that one block for that snapshot in time of 24 hours. Going the next 3 sections, I won't go through them all in detail, but those 3 sections, the average speeds are roughly around 5 miles per hour over the posted limit, which isn't, and in fact the last between Millview and the city limit, the average speed is basically at the posted limit. So those would be considered acceptable and within normal range. They would not be considered to be a problem. The first one, Main to Walnut, would consider to be an issue. Rahat indicated in his recommendation, we can take a couple of steps at this point in time. We can go out and focus our efforts from Main to Walnut to better quantify the speeds which actually occur in that area, because again, this was only a 24-hour period. Council could direct us to go out and do all of these areas for a longer period of time, or again, you can direct and authorize the mayor to send a letter to IDOT, in changing speed limits. The anecdotal evidence is that IDOT may not be supportive of such a request, just based on the evidence that we have. That might be the interim step of going out for more data. But if the more data returns similar results, again, it's probably going to be something that IDOT wouldn't be supportive of to change speed limits, at least in those last 3 sections. So I turn it back over to you for discussion.
I guess the first thing I would say, I don't remember if it said what days of the week those were, because I don't like to see what it'd be like on a Friday to compare the speeds.
Typically, you do traffic studies Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays.
Okay.
You avoid the Mondays and Fridays and weekends. That's just
Okay.
the nature of traffic studies.
Okay. Because that's where I've noticed it maybe the most. And I've tried to pay attention to it the times I've been on 31 South just to see what I thought of it. And the few times that I've had to pull out from either Carlisle or from the other side of it on that curve, that's a really interesting spot to pull out from.
So data taken on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or Monday, again, would be probably looked at by IDOT with a little more skepticism because of the fact that kind of the traffic engineering world operates in the midday world, midweek world. That's supposed to represent kind of the best representation of a 24-hour period. You pick your Friday or your Saturday or Sunday, you may get an extreme, as opposed to trying to represent over the course of a 24-hour period.
Anybody else have comments?
Yeah, I know that a 24-hour period is just not enough time because I've lived on this stretch for nearly 10 years now, and it's the area that I get the most complaints about. It's got the highest traffic of school kids coming in and out with parents trying to get out of Carlisle with that bend right there. I travel it, or used to until I just moved, but the going from Bernadette to North Aurora on 31, I can do the speed limit and get constantly past 50, 60 miles an hour. And I did have the training in gauging how fast those cars are going. And some of them coming into town are doing well into the 60s. There's no doubt about that. They just speed up on the stretch. Now, I know that one stretch is not ours in front of the south of Millview, right?
Right.
Yeah, and that's one of the spots that's always the white knuckle spot. And they, I mean, obviously in the past year and a half, they've got the fatalities to kind of show through that area.
Would that be, Marty, would that be this, where it says Millview Street to city limits, would that be this northbound inside, the 51 miles an hour?
Probably, yeah. Yeah, because as soon as people gas it out of the,
Off of Moose Heart there.
yeah, where they put the stoplight in, they just gas it through there. And I think most people are just because they're trying to get out of, away from people. But you've got trucks, buses, it's so narrow. We've talked about at the intersection of Millview and 31, that's just waiting for, because that one with the speed northbound and the people that stop to turn onto Millview, I think we've had a couple accidents there in the recent past of rear-enders, northbound, inside lane. Southbound it isn't so much, but it is definitely northbound, and some of these other areas may be reflective of that. It's that blind area, the curve. You've got the baseball field there with Merlot Park, yeah. So it's just I hate that stretch, and if they're not willing to drop it down, I know we could sit in that fishing hole all day and just catch speeders left and right.
So again, one of the things staff said we can do was go out and obtain more data, longer counts in all of these areas if that's council's desire, and then report back to you. And we don't know what the results will be. I had said it before, and I'll say it again. If the results are similar to this, it's probably unlikely that IDOT will support any changes to the speed limit, because these results for the last three segments here would not justify a change to the speed limit. But that's not to say that that's going to be the same results over several days. So,
And I think that's what we need to do is do the longer time. And then if IDOT didn't want to do anything with the speed, I know there are residents that are willing to take up that charge and put on some political pressure for IDOT to make some calls. The whole association at Millview wants to see on Gosling. They have constantly come out and said they want the speeding stopped through there. I know they've written to Mike Fortner. I know they've reached out to other people. They definitely do want to see something. And then residents that live up and down there, along with the parents at AGS.
Chief, did you want to say something?
Yes, if I could just add that, just for a point of clarity, our police jurisdiction stops at Millview Drive. So the residents of Goslin are typically complaining about the traffic, the speeding, the sounds of speeding south of Millview Drive, which is in the county's jurisdiction. We don't have any addresses that butt up against Batavia Avenue south of Millview. So it's still policed by the Kane County Sheriff. The fatal actions we've had in the last, I believe, 3 to 4 years, one was a weather-related incident where the vehicle crossed the center line and was struck head-on, and the other was a distracted driving incident. And the third one that occurred in the last 5 years, I believe, and all investigated by the County Sheriff's Department, was an intersection-related accident at Mooseheart and Batavia Avenue or Lincoln Way, wherever it intersects there. So that's the issue south of Millview. We don't really have much police control over it. We don't actively conduct speed enforcement in that area. That being said, in the entirety of Batavia Avenue, 2017, we took over 1,100 enforcement actions in Batavia between Fabian Parkway and Millview Drive, and this year 545, give or take. So we're on a trajectory to exceed our traffic enforcement activities out there this year as opposed to last year. In addition to that, one thing that probably is worth noting here is that the crash data is on a downward trajectory on Batavia Avenue from Main Street to Millview Drive. We're attributing it largely to the improvements to the roadway. Honestly, the road was in really bad repair in 2016. When they did the road repairs, it narrowed the roadway because of all the crumbling in the outside lanes. They've effectively been widened. So in 2016, let's see here, in 2016, between Main and Millview, we had 25 crashes. Many of them were at Main Street, so honestly, to be honest with you, I would probably hold them off to the side anyways. 2017, it went down to 11 crashes along the entire that stretch of roadway. This year, year to date, 3, with a projection for 7 year to date if the metrics hold out. Between Main and Walnut, we are doing target enforcement there now as a result of the speed study. But to be honest with you, we don't have, even though the speeds seem higher, we don't have any kind of negative traffic crash activity there. 9 in 2016, mostly at Main and Batavia. 5 in 2017, only 1 so far this year. So speeds may be higher, crashes are far lower.
Scott?
Is there any correlation between putting up like a speed gun, like we had that up on North Batavia Avenue, and having, just post a speed limit, as far as what that might be, and having any sort of effect on traffic, slowing it down?
We have a speed sign up in the normal area in North Batavia Avenue,
Right.
now north of the pedestrian crossing. We also have another one right in the proximity of Carlisle Road. Now, we have them set to not go off unless the speed exceeds 5 miles per hour, and that's just just a simple battery savings measure. They're battery operated, and we have to replace them every time they charge down. So if anybody exceeds 5 miles over the posted limit, it will flash their speed and rapid flash their speed. What I will tell you about that is it'll have a calming effect for a duration of time, and then people become blind to it.
Yeah.
I saw it flash as I went by on my way here. Coming down. Gary?
Alderman Atack had asked a question, she emailed staff regarding the ADTs, the average daily traffic that's referenced in the second paragraph there. What I don't know is if you ever got an answer back. If not, I'll follow up on that.
I did get some answers, yes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure, because
Yes.
I don't know that I was on the return side of the email, so, okay.
Thank you.
Just regarding those, the Goslin, that's why I referred them to Fortner if they wanted to do anything south, because that's where I have constantly told them through there. And I think most people do realize that it's from basically the Mooseheart gates,
Entrance there, yeah.
the entrance up, and that's where the one accident was. Actually, I think both of them were just north of that gate where the drive is.
Right, the 2 fatals in the last 24 months.
Yeah, those are where it happens, and that's where I tell everybody our line ends, and they do know that, but they still want to vent about it. And
There's no doubt, there's some difficulties with that intersection. The majority of crashes we see there are rear end, but more so than that, left turning actions. Either turning off of Millview onto South Batavia Avenue or turning off of Batavia Avenue onto Millview westbound. So there's a lot of conflict there. And there is speed because as they're leaving their jurisdiction, they start to increase their speed knowing they're getting ready to enter a 45-mile-an-hour zone.
Right. And at the curve there, I know there was just within the last 2 weeks, the hit and run that was at Merlot and right at the curve, but it got driven up to Maine.
I believe so, yes.
Yeah,
We also had a medical incident there.
Yeah.
Where there was a crash on the westbound side of the road.
Because that's where Pinnell's house sits, right there, and I know that is a major, major concern for her with what she sees and all the time. And she reaches out to me constantly.
Well, I think if we have any chance of IDOT giving us any kind of relief and dropping the speed limit, we're going to have more data that shows higher speeds. And
Right.
Or it doesn't even make any sense to try to go after that.
Speed in curves is always, I guess, over-exaggerated. It gives it an optical appearance of excessive speed in curves. We get that down on Randall Road between Main Street and Mooseheart Road as well, in the S-curve there. And then, just the geography of Batavia Avenue there as it doglegs to the right as you go southbound. People feel like the traffic is coming faster because they don't see it until it comes around the curve.
One last issue which is related but completely unrelated, and the mayor and I have talked about this several times. Once you go, if you're heading northbound, you go around the curve and now you're right by the West Side Cemetery, there's a stretch there where on the west side, the only lighting is the historic Mooseheart concrete lights. So you come out of the overhead Cobra lights and you go into a stretch a block and a half long or so, 2 blocks, where there is effectively no lighting, and then you go back into lighting again. Those, and Mayor can help me, one of those lights is like one of the most historic or original lights that were placed out there, and there's like 3 or 4 of them in a row. So that's kind of a factor in the large picture too on South Batavia Avenue. You just have that couple block stretch that isn't really well lit.
I think we should concentrate on the speed part of it right now and see if we can have data that supports requesting, dropping the limit. So I think we should go for whatever time frame, if it's 3 days, 5 days, whatever we think will work. Do that and then compare that data and see what we get.
Fair enough.
Come back to us. Okay. Anybody else have anything? Everybody okay with that?
Okay. We'll move on then to Resolution 18-71-R, which is approving a grant of easement with LaSalle National Bank or with LaSalle National Trust for the dam signage and lighting. Alderman Wolf.
Okay. This is in our continuing quest of meeting insurance obligations on the dam. We have to get a grant of easement from the property owner on the east side of the river. And that looks like that's a trust.
It's owned by a trust. There's three parties that we have to work with on this project, one of which was the Park District, which the council's already approved an intergovernmental agreement with. The second which is tonight, this is the challenge property, and the third which will be coming back to you next committee meeting, that's the intergovernmental agreement for the Forest Preserve District. The one we're going to discuss tonight is owned by a trust. It is the challenge property on the east side of the river, and generally the same terms and conditions as was discussed with the Park District and will be discussed with the Forest Preserve District. I tried to highlight the main points on the front page. In essence, giving the city an easement to install, own, and maintain signage and lighting that will be installed along that east bank for dam safety.
I have a couple questions. First off, it's a trust that's dated from 1956.
Yes,
So it's still just whoever owns the property.
same people.
Same people still own it from 56.
Yeah, Gene is the gentleman, didn't he explain to us that like his father or something was?
Yeah, it was his father bought it
Yeah.
with
Okay.
another group in 1946 for $29,000, the whole operation. And then his father, I think, bought out the rest of the trust members in 56.
Okay. And so we have somebody to contact locally if we need
Yeah,
for
Laura
access
and
and
I
everything.
met with him out
Just
there.
That was the main thing. I wanted to make sure that we had somebody. It wasn't, we sent a letter to somebody at LaSalle Trust and waited for a response.
We physically walked out there with him and met
Okay.
him. I've met him out there a couple of times on
Okay,
site.
that's really what I wanted to make sure is that we had somebody local, that we weren't dealing with, somebody in Chicago, that
bank.
we had to wait for a month to get an answer when we're
Nope.
trying to do something, so, okay. That's the question I had. Anybody else? Pretty self-explanatory.
What are the costs
Cost for this easement?
for the easement itself, and then just for the lighting and on the east side and maintaining it in perpetuity?
Okay, so the lighting and signage project is out to bid. We're just opening bids on that and working through a bid issue on that one. With respect to the cost for this easement is being granted with no specific compensation cited. Laura and I have talked, we feel that it might be a good gesture on the city's behalf. He's had an attorney look this over. I'm assuming the attorney probably spent a couple hours looking it over, for the city to make a gesture to say, hey, can we reimburse you for your attorney's costs? That's about, that's the only compensation that we would consider for this easement. And then the third question with regards to maintaining and lighting and signage in perpetuity is really no different than any other lighting and signage throughout the city. So signs have a defined lifespan. Nowadays, when we manufacture signs, we put an expiration date on them. Okay, so taking 3 steps back, signs have to meet certain reflectivity standards. That's dictated by the MUTCD, the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. I think I've told you before, the only people who use that are engineers and lawyers. So the signs have to have certain reflectivity, and you can test reflectivity. That's a pretty expensive process, or you can just say signs have a certain lifespan, which is what we do in the city. It's just a lot simpler that way. I think it's like 15 years, and it depends on the nature of the sign. So to answer your question, every 15 years or so, we're going to have to replace the signs, just like we replace all the stop signs and street signs and any other sign in town. It becomes part of the city's costs.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, any other questions? Anyone care to make a motion on Resolution 18-71-R approving a grant of easement?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
You're opposed to it, right?
Opposed.
Okay, so we'll talk about it.
That's right.
Okay.
Okay. We'll move on then to the next one, which is the discussion on the North Batavia Dam planning efforts status update. Alderman Wolf.
Okay, this was also sent out. If I can get this one up. Give me 1 second. Okay, at our April 17th meeting, staff presented an update regarding the ongoing signage and lighting plan, as well as potential future maintenance and construction projects at the North Batavia Dam. Staff was directed to follow up on several items and report back to us at a future date. That is what is happening tonight. Gary.
Happening tonight, thank you. Yes, we worked with our engineers, WBK engineers, to reach out to the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. They have jurisdiction over the dam on the Fox River. During conversations with them, we were informed by IDNR that the dam is officially listed as being in a failed condition. IDNR will not issue permits for structural repair work. They've basically made the determination that if any work is to be done to that dam, it needs to be brought up completely to today's standards. And what that essentially means is dam replacement, because they would not allow for structural repairs or a dam to go back in of the same geometry today, which leads to the boils. WBK also expressed their hesitancy about making structural modifications. As you all know, the eastern half of that dam, there's been a structural failure. And what's the underlying cause, what's the structural engineering cause of that eastern half to fail would need to have a pretty extensive structural investigation in order to determine that. So there's really no structural engineer who's going to sign off on plans without going through a fairly extensive structural analysis to begin with. And then WBK also expressed concerns regarding the geometry and the boils. So based on those two things, we met internally on the 21st as staff along with WBK to discuss strategies for going forward. Certainly one of those strategies is the city could decide to replace the dam, tear it out, rebuild it brand new, meeting today's standards. Frankly, that's probably an extremely uphill battle. Highly doubtful that we would get a permit for that, because as you all know, the IDNR really wants to get rid of the dams ultimately. We would face considerable opposition, not to mention the costs involved with doing all of that. So that's probably not a course of action that's likely to be feasible. At the staff level and with WBK, we also agreed, though, that a take-no-action strategy, just simply letting it sit out there and forgetting about it, probably also isn't sustainable over the long term. Our insurance is a good example of that. They have continued to press us to say, city, if you want insurance, you have to meet this requirement. And simply ignoring it and not doing anything about it is not something that our insurance company is going to just let us do forevermore. So staff is kind of making recommendations tonight that may fit in the large picture of your strategic planning, which is currently ongoing. And that is to address the dam in one fashion or another. Doesn't mean we have to address the dam in 2018. Staff is just recommending that we start to develop a plan so that we can have a course of action going forward. It may be a very long-term strategy, but at least we can point to a course of action. One of those might be a smaller dam just to preserve the depot pond, and you guys have seen variations of that. One went northward from the gazebo, if you will, encompassed Duck Island and kept going northward up the west bank. I mean, that created a very large kind of pond area. Just brainstorming, another option would be start at the gazebo and go due west and just preserve that portion of the pond. There can be 100 different variations. But some concept where the pond is preserved, and by doing that, then the existing dam could be essentially demolished, or at least in a phased approach, demolished so that it doesn't impound water anymore and can eliminate the potential for the hazards. That's just, again, one strategy. The strategy may also include other improvements, upstream and downstream, and you guys have talked a lot, and again, that may be part of your strategic plan to make enhancements and improvements to the river. We have funds in the budget this year for all this work related to the dam. And we have talked about and been in communications with the Park District regarding that process. So we're recommending to continue forward with conceptual plans, conceptual planning efforts, so that's something we probably can do in a relatively short time period, and we can at least get ballpark cost estimates, which will be just that, ballparks, but at least their orders of magnitude. The study, which was done 10 plus years ago now, I mean, that was a $13 million project. I mean, at least it was enough of a magnitude cost so that you knew what you were talking about. And that's kind of what we're thinking now, is at least some magnitude of cost to give you some feel for what this strategy or that strategy might cost, and then that can help you with your strategic planning. And that's kind of where we're at right now.
One of the things that we talked about or found out about when we were downstate this year was that there's actually money available from IDOT for, if we were to combine this with rerouting the bike path, say if we were to make any kind of berm to wall off the pond on this side, that if you were to run a path across there, that could qualify for traffic mitigation because it would provide a path for both bicyclists and pedestrians, where IDOT could see that it would only be engineering money, but it would help us get through the engineering phase of trying to fix this.
Similar to what you authorized us to do for the treatment plant.
Right.
Same pot of money.
And that is available again for that. So that was one of my suggestions, is that maybe we start to figure out how do we wrap that into there to try to get the engineering part of it paid for with some money that's available through the state to get that moving forward. And then that also gives us, I think, an added benefit of not just an earthen dam or a berm or something out there to wall this pond in, but to actually use it for something beyond just separating the pond from the river. So I think that that's a big plus there. And I think Gary's right that we have to figure out, we may not have all the money to fund all this yet, but we have to have a plan that when we can fund it, or when we decide that we're going to fund it, that the plan is there and ready to go, so that we don't wait for that. Because I don't think if we wait till although I think it might not be a bad idea to wait till the dam breaks, because then when the dam is gone, you have the availability of a dried out pond to clear it out. And to me, we should be able to take all of what the dam is built with today, break that up and use that to make the berm on the other side. So we're not bringing in more fill into the river, we're just moving it from one place to another.
Structurally, from the best information we have, is the dam likely will not experience, a catastrophic failure one day here and the next day mud flat. And that's not likely what's going to happen. What likely is going to happen is, and you guys have already envisioned, or you guys have already observed it happening over the last 15, 20 years, that is that during one winter storm, a piece is going to crumble off. And then during one flooding event, 3 more pieces are going to crumble off. That's how the dam is going to slowly disintegrate. That's kind of what the engineer's opinion is.
Elliot?
No, I would just say on that same note, because I remember when we sat there down in Springfield at IDNR, I had the same kind of reaction, when they were talking about it. I mean, a year ago it was nothing was moving forward. There were no funds. Don't even bother wasting your time. This year they were already in action on 2 different major dams that were in failure state. So I agree. I think we need to get our plan in order and quick. If we're going to, stand to have anything done with this by IDNR with their blessing, and I would agree. I mean, if there's at all potential to use the material that's already there, as opposed to adding or trying to remove and dispose of, then let's do it. Let's get that plan at least together.
Marty?
I think there's a hindrance to any plan that we're going to discuss without the 800-pound gorilla that sits in the room, and not talking about Dave, but the ownership of the dam as a question that hasn't been litigated or resolved. I know we have a letter from our attorney stating it. There are some that believe that we own the dam. There are some that don't. Any plan that we try to put forward is going to always have to the public a lingering question of, well, why are you doing anything? Because you don't own it. I've heard some people say you own it. I've heard some people say you don't own it. It's almost like before we do any planning, we need to put a nail in the coffin and either get a declaratory judgment or something along those lines where we have something that says a judge has reviewed it, take it to arbitration, whatever the actual process for determining physical land ownership would be, and that would probably have to come from Kevin. But what do we need to do to kind of get that resolved so that we don't have these questions of, well, I think it is and I think it's not. That needs to be put away, and then we can concentrate on what options we then put our time and energy into figuring out.
Personally, I think that question's already been answered. We wanted to convey the dam to the state. They didn't want to do it unless we were willing to help fund it, so they never took title to it. That meant we still have the title to the dam.
And I appreciate that and I understand that, but out of respect for, Dave's view is different on it. And when we're always having these discussions, if we are always starting out whatever plan that we're going to decide on, if we're going to have someone still believe, in which Dave has every right to, that we do not own the dam, that is a hindrance in trying to get public buy-in about what we're going to do, because we're not on a unified message knowing exactly. And I think for Dave's peace of mind, he's at least entitled to that. And what if it turns out that he's absolutely right on it?
In all reality, I don't think it matters who owns it, because IDNR is going to be the overreaching authority that's going to approve removal of it, or any repair, if there was any repair done to it. They would be the one that would approve that. And they will retain the waterway rights to the river regardless of what's in or not in the river.
Yeah, but ownership would kind of force some financial aspects to it. So, I mean, I never really thought about what Marty just brought up, but I think it might be a pretty good idea. I have no problem with moving forward, as I have mentioned in the past, moving forward with coming up with the plan of what we're going to do. We've talked about the fact that IDNR already had a plan of what we could do, and couldn't we just build off of that? Because there was a lot of engineering that was done for that. But, if we move forward with that idea, what Marty just brought up might be a very good idea, that we don't take, that we take some type of legal course to say to the state, not that we're saying, I think we would need to approach it in a way that we're not saying, well, we don't think that we're the ownership, could you show us, could you, argue this with us? We want to go to them and say, the dam is failing in the river going through our town, and we want you to repair it, because we believe that the transfer of ownership was intended to be yours.
We can certainly write a letter to that effect, but I think we've already had our response from the current membership of IDNR that they don't perceive that to be their dam. And in terms of the declaratory action, would we be taking the position that it is and asking the court to verify that it is? Because that's the city attorney's opinion.
We'd be wanting to take the position that it's not ours. As we remember when Kevin was sitting there that night when he gave us that memo, he couldn't find anything saying that the state took ownership of it. But he also couldn't find anything saying that the city had title of it.
My thinking behind it is exactly like Dave's saying. If the question is lingering out there just publicly, who owns the dam? Being able to fund anything, if we're going to say the residents are going to fund the dam that we don't own, then would we be met with some challenges in resistance to getting anything actually accomplished? I'm just saying it needs to be resolved at some point. And if it means going to IDNR and going, here, would you file with us? And these are the things that I would say we would have to leave up to Kevin, just both parties in a non-adversarial position state, here are the facts that we both have. Here are our positions. Can we get a judge's ruling on it? And when we get a judge's ruling on it, I think then it would have more credibility that it's been answered. In a court of law, it has been answered, so that when we're going to, hey, public, we need your funding on this. We're going to put it out to a referendum. We're going to put it out to bonding. We're using public funds, and the reason why we're using those public funds is because we own the dam, and it's crumbling, and then we're all together on that narrative rather than Dave saying it's not our dam, and Alan saying it is our dam. To the public, they're going to go, well, then why are you spending my money if you don't know whose it is? I think we owe that as a first and foremost to settling any final decisions.
So I think that the result of Kevin's memo was that he was saying there wasn't a basis for the city to say that someone else has ownership. So it would be difficult for us to take that position in a declaratory judgment.
And I understand that, and I agree with that, but I'm saying going forward, it's going to be tough. I'm just trying to figure out different avenues that we can
disclaim ownership?
I respect what everybody's trying to do here, and I think I respect more what Marty's trying to do than what you're trying to say, because just going through this waste disposal thing, we got two different attorneys in two different towns that look at the way that was handled differently.
I disagree, because the city of Geneva has an ordinance that requires that to be follow the bidding procedure.
Yeah, Geneva has an ordinance that says follow the bid, so that's, yeah, they each said the right things for their own communities. The one thing I'll think that came out of what Kevin, the email and everything that he sent back to us, was to go to a court and say, put this in front of a judge. The judge is going to look at it and say, okay, you were conveying the dam to the state in your minds, and that's what was in our minutes and everything that was there. That meant that we owned it. If we were going to convey the ownership of the dam to some entity, IDNR in the state, that meant that we had ownership of it. So that really, if you go back and look at it from a legal standpoint, that says you own the dam.
Yeah, but
and if the state didn't take it, then you still own it.
I'm not going to argue that you're wrong on that, but the intent, and that's where a court would have to step in on this. The intent was that if the city acquired the rights to the property around it so that the state could go in and work on it and maintain it and rebuild it or whatever they were going to do, they would take ownership of it. But the city had to get those rights first.
There was nothing in that document to indicate that the state intended to take ownership. They said that
It
we
might have
needed
all
to
been
show,
verbal.
in
I
order,
don't-
in order for us to give them permission to repair the dam. So until we could show that we were the controlling interest in those parcels, otherwise they would have to go to the individual owners of those parcels and obtain the right to come in and do the repairs. And that was the 1975. I think the instance that you are referring to is much more in the recent
Right,
past,
when
in
we had the
2004.
plan of all the engineering to
Well,
remove the dam.
I'm going to suggest something here, okay? Because we're spending a lot of time on this over the last 2 years, talking about this. And there's 14 of us and the mayor, and I'm only one. And if you guys all, if we take a vote as to who this city council thinks owns the dam, and the city council decides that Batavia does, I'm done. I'm still going to vote no on everything that we have to do with anything that insinuates we own the dam. But I'll quit taking up everybody's time. But could I ask a couple questions about what Gary is talking about here?
Sure.
Regarding the conclusion that you've come up with what WBK and IDNR have talked about and what you just reported to us, how does that affect our insurance? Because we had to get this report done and evaluation done in order to insure the dam.
Right, so we had it.
And now that we've done it,
Yep.
are we hanging ourselves out to dry even more if we don't take action to repair the dam, now that we've acknowledged that there's a problem?
Yeah, no.
Yeah, they made it clear to us. We had a conference call with them, and they indicated that they would be willing to insure the dam so long as we put the public safety notices up, because they saw far more risk of liability in someone being caught in the boil than property damage if the dam were to fail. It's the boil that is the riskiest elements of the dam.
Scott?
So just going back to what Marty said, and I think we do, regardless of whether the state owns it, we own it, whatever, and we do have to come to a conclusion, only because if we decide within, our strategy that, well, it sounds like one way or the other, that dam's going to need to come down at some point. I mean, period. Correct?
At some point in the future.
Right. And so, given that, we're going to have to plan around that. And we're going to, and if we need to go to get funding, which is probably, I know there's some available through EPA, through, there's mechanisms that can at least help us. But given that, we would have to establish who owns it in order to be able to do that. So, to Marty's point, I think we at least need to come to some resolution as to that, whatever that is. But we have to figure that out, I think, before we can make plans, but we're not going to be able to get any outside funding if they don't know who owns it.
I think we're the only ones who dispute who owns it. So if we were to apply for funding on the basis that it's our dam and we're applying for funding to fix the dam, nobody would say you don't have a right to apply for funding because you don't own the dam. That's not something that's at risk.
Of course, we're going to be the only ones. I mean,
Right,
nobody else wants it.
right.
And so, I mean, we don't want it.
If we're the only ones that dispute it, why is it so difficult to get an authoritative decision that says you own it? So everybody knows, and it's not even.
I guess it's unusual for a party to say, go into court. Yeah, I mean, I think that you're saying go into court and have them tell us that you have this liability of this dam. I mean, it's probably not unprecedented, but we, have the legal opinion from our attorney that if someone had to make a judgment about who owns the dam, there is plenty of evidence that can be presented, documentary evidence that can be presented that points to the city of Batavia as the owner of this dam, and there isn't anything contrary to disprove that.
Why isn't there anything that proves it? Isn't there a deed somewhere?
All of it points to us. We're the owner of
So when you
record.
say it all points to us, that means there is a deed filed with the state that says Batavia owns it?
No.
No, there's not.
There's, no, it's the county record. So I wish Scott was here tonight because Scott is much better at the research of the documentary evidence, but
Yeah, I don't know the story.
Why
There
is
is
he
that
not-
story about Bill McGrath attempting to convey it back to the state and the state refusing.
yes.
But I don't know that document that he attempted to convey.
Right,
That's
and
the
I get
document
that, and if I said, you know what, I don't own my house, Marty owns it, you can go to the state and they go, no, Nick, it's right here, you own it. I mean, it should be definitive somewhere along the line who the owner is, no matter what we say. You know, somebody's got to have a record of who owns it.
It's my understanding that it's not been recorded that we
I
own.
wouldn't be surprised.
What's that?
I wouldn't be surprised, like you
Yeah.
said,
Right.
because these are historic.
So who owned it before us?
Individual property owners adjacent to the dam.
So has that been
I
recorded?
think some of the original
Yes.
dams came from the Challenge Building, right?
Yes.
Challenge property.
There are conveyances.
Jeff's got more history on this than any of
As
us.
I understand it, the history lesson is that the dam is, there's two dams up there. Let's get that on the table.
Yeah.
There's one you see and there's one you don't see, and that's up above the one that you see. It was never taken out of the ground when the second one was built, which I believe was about 1913. The first one was built by Mr. Van Noordrijk and the Gammons and the Newtons and all these people who were in Batavia. Because if you think about how this whole thing, we had this river here, and they all built their factories on this side of the riverbank. And what they needed to do with the dam was take the water that was coming at them and divert the water over to the west side of their factory buildings, and then run the water through their factories and dump the water back into the river, but that way they were operating their processes. And so that included the Van Noordrijks here, the Newtons were next door in the wagon company, the Shumways who had the foundry. There was a whole bunch of names I could cite that were involved in this thing. So it was a privately built dam, as I understand it initially. Then in 1913, that one wasn't big enough, and apparently it had some structural defaults in it. So the group came and they built a second one. And at that time, the Challenge wanted to take the water from the river and put it into their factory. So they went up and excavated north of the Challenge factory, about 35 feet in the river. That may be one of the deepest points in the entire Fox River, just north of the dam on the east side of the dam. And the reason I'm told that the dam has collapsed as quickly as it did on the east side is that's the part of the dam that is under constant water pressure because the river's inclination is to flow to the east once it comes underneath the Fabian Parkway Bridge, because that was the area where all the water was being channeled, so it went underneath the Challenge windmill factory. And if you go up to the Challenge today, what we just talked about with the owners, that raceway still exists up there, and some of that water still runs under some of their buildings. Another of the buildings they had was cantilevered out over the river, and you can see the pylons that building sat on are still out in the water there. That burned down about 1983 one night. It was a wood frame structure, and somebody torched it off, and that disappeared. So this was a whole private industry thing. That's the reason this dam was here. This wasn't here to generate water for Batavia or drinking water or anything else. This was a private energy thing before electricity. And then after electricity came, they still were able to use it as a divergence from not, back in those days, we're trying to save money on our electric bills, so they still wanted to use the water power. So there's a story I was told way back when by one of the guys who was still alive when I was first elected, that at one point the city of Batavia made the decision in the early 1960s that this second channel of the river, which was still here, and there was a bridge in front of where McDonald's now is, and ran down to where the sewer plant is, and then it put itself back into the river. They wanted to fill that in and build some commercial activity on it. And so they went down to Springfield one day, sent a letter down to the state and said, we'd like to come down and talk about getting a permit to fill the second channel of the river. And when the city attorney and the mayor got down there, they were told by whoever then was running the Department of Waterways, we don't know anything about a second channel of the Fox River in Batavia. Apparently, it was all built without a permit, without a plan, without approval. Somebody just built this thing back in 1870 or whenever, because if you think about the depth of Depot Pond next door here, we could probably go out there, all of us could walk right across the water tonight, because it's only about 2 or 3 feet deep there. And supposedly it was all dug out by horses and plows in about 1870. And then they made this second channel for all these factories to use. And downtown Batavia, for our first 75 years of our existence, was just an industrial park with a little commercial built over on Batavia Avenue and some over at River and Wilson. Everybody walked to the factories downtown, walked home, walked by the commercial, and that's where they shopped. And then all this river, the whole frontage here, including the building we were in, was nothing but industrial. And they were taking advantage of this water power. So I don't know, I cannot find any evidence that the city of Batavia ever really was involved in the ownership of this dam. Yeah, we were certainly here supporting the factories that did it, but I'm not sure that there's no deed or anything that exists that the city of Batavia is in direct ownership of this dam.
Now, when they bought this building, was that included in the parcel attached to this building?
Well, we bought this building.
And the island, didn't we buy, or
We
the,
bought
this?
the island, and we bought that channel of the river where the Depot Pond is.
Okay.
And the deal is that the Park District then was just being formed, and they bought the city bought the property from Batavia Enterprises, I believe it was for $715,000, and included about 15 acres of ground, including all the water. And then the Park District bought that for like $170,000. I'd have to go back and look at the history. But they bought that, and that helped the city make the down payment on the city buying this property from Batavia Enterprises. So there's a real clouded history here, but I don't think there's any really tried and true deeds or ownership issues that anybody can really put on the table that truly shows this, because as the state said, they didn't have any record of the pond even being made when it was being built. So, I mean, that happened 50, 60 years ago.
Because I would think there would have to be a parcel number or something attached to the property that would show lines drawn on it. Somebody's property's got to show a line, because I know most of these properties downtown here, some of them extended out into the middle of the river, some of them extend just to the shore, you know, to a concrete or to a limestone wall. I mean, there's so many different things that happen along this river at different points in time that show ownership.
I hear these numbers being battered around to what it would take to rebuild the Challenge Dam up there. And I mean, it's multi-millions of dollars. And I don't know how you would pay for that. I mean, you'd have to go to the property taxpayers and say, here, we're going to dump this $10 million referendum on you, and you're going to rebuild the dam up here. And somebody in this group is going to ask, well, what are we rebuilding it for? What use does it have for us in today's world? Because that would be an extremely expensive thing to go up there and extricate 2 dams out of the river, because there are 2 up there. And then you're dealing with this east bank with this 35-foot depth that's right along the river there. I mean, there's a lot of issues up there that I don't know if the taxpayers of Batavia want to buy into and pay for on their property tax backs, when there's a lot of other stuff that they're already complaining about, much less putting something like that on their face.
I don't think rebuilding is ever going to be a question. I don't think that is ever going to happen.
And that's what WBK Engineering said.
Right.
It wasn't worth going through,
Even-
even the investigation.
Right, even a
that would be
temporary
necessary
repair.
for, as a structural engineer, to sign off on
To
that.
Marty's point and to the mayor's point, if there is no true evidence, there is no fact. And I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a judge, but there is no true evidence and there is no fact of ownership. But if it were to go to a judge, the fact that it's located in a river that IDNR has jurisdiction over, wouldn't it appear that they have control and or ownership?
Not when there's actual documents that exist,
There are no,
where it's the minutes of a city council meeting wherein the city council is saying that they'll gain control over that in order to have ownership of it, and followed by
That was the 70s.
attempts to transfer ownership to someone else.
Didn't you tell me, Laura, that IDNR was trying to repair the dam in the 70s?
They did.
Oh, they did
They
repair
did,
it.
but they required that we acquire ownership. That's what the city council meeting said, because otherwise we had to give them the right to come onto the land to do that. And they didn't want.
We gave them the right to do that?
Yes,
They
we
wanted
gave them the
us
right
to
to
do
go
that.
onto it to repair it. Marty?
How did we give them the right if we didn't, if there's no document that says we owned it, I guess?
The city council meeting said that we need to acquire that so that we can do that. And
We
then
acquired like properties, we acquired rights from
Yes.
property owners in order to do that.
Rights.
The rights for the, I guess, and I don't understand it, but I'm saying just the rights of the property owners we acquired. We didn't acquire the ownership, I mean,
Dam
of the
itself.
dam itself. We said, just, okay, we got easements for IDNR to go in and work on the dam.
I think this would be a question that Scott could probably answer from the land map with the tax ID numbers and the property lines.
sadly, no. I have the utmost faith
He's
in
already
Scott's
researched it.
abilities. Where it breaks down, as Mayor indicated, is the existence of actual documents.
Okay, right.
So I guess since
So at the
I
county
don't know
land
if
map,
you
there's
want
no
a
lines drawn in the river or around the dam or
Alan,
anything
I
else?
look at it like if you're living in your house and I come over and I say, Alan, you're in my house, get out. And you say, oh, it's my house. And I say, well, show me your deed. And you say, well, I don't have one, but it's mine.
Right,
Well,
that's what
it's
I'm saying,
not.
is
If
it,
you don't have a deed saying it's yours.
that's why I think we need to figure out what exactly the lines are,
So I'd like to make a suggestion.
okay?
If with the consensus of the committee, we one day may be asking Kevin Drendel to go for a judge and argue that the dam is not ours. So we could ask Kevin to prepare a strategy that he can argue then to say the dam is not ours. And then present that strategy back to you, because Kevin will also have to present what the opposite side's gonna say. Any good attorney is gonna tell you that, the defense is gonna come at me with these points.
Right.
And then you guys can decide, is it worthwhile pursuing this or not? Because Kevin may come to you and say, I've got 10 points which prove the dam is not ours, and there's 10 points over here which prove the dam is ours, and you guys might say 10 and 10, let's go for it. Or we might say there's one that says the dam is not ours, and there's 10 that say the dam is ours, and then you guys might say not go for it. So, but I think that might be one way to do this, is to
And just to chime in on that, the situation that I worry about, of course, it is a grave concern about the use of our taxpayers' money to pay for something, making sure that we're paying for something that is ours. But the bigger issue that I'm concerned about is in the event that there is a fatality, as there have been in Geneva, as there have been in Aurora, and that is where the question will end up being
unfortunately,
litigated.
that's how the question will end up being decided.
But
So-
we're insured against it. I'm sorry, Marty, go
We
ahead.
are not right now.
We are not.
But we're
So-
working towards that.
Correct.
So that's exactly why I supported putting the signs and the lighting up, because we are taking affirmative steps to limit the city's liability for those fatality accidents. And I base that off of what Kevin stated. Based on the totality of those facts, the more prudent measure would be to protect the public, assume less risk, assume less ultimate liability, because if there is ever a fatality, this question would have to be answered, because it would have to be established as fact. I don't want to wait for a fatality for that to be established, because now we're talking about ownership and expending funds, and how much, we don't know. It could be $8, $13, $25 million. To do that, we've got to be able to say credibly, this is our dam. Based on this discussion and how many times I have had solid cases from either a district attorney going, oh yeah, well, you've met all the elements of the crime, or in insurance cases where I've had an attorney state, oh yeah, you've got definite fraud. All of those things turn on a dime with what Dave said about intent. There are so many questions on this that it can't be decided by us as non-lawyers. And that's what I want to get us away from. Kevin is advocating on behalf of the city. I understand that, but I think the most practical thing to do, based on all of these questions, is to have an impartial ruling on it. And if it is ours, I will fully support it. As I've made sure that I've been saying that if it's ours, then we should be doing those things to protect the public. Flip that over. If we're going to buy this, then we need to make sure that we own it conclusively. I know that we've got this information, but we don't have, to Nick's point, here's the paperwork right here that we can, being stewards of the public's money, to be able to say, this is ours, this is why we're spending your money. Those things are, it's elementary that we can't decide amongst ourselves. It's going to sit here going round and round and round for years and years and years. We own it, no we don't, yes we do, yes. Take it out of our hands and say, exactly like Gary said. So I would say, if another alderman would join me, have Kevin review what our strategy would be to figure out what legal objective course that we could have that someone outside the city goes, here you go. This is the ruling. This is you. Who owns it? You own it. State owns it. Put it to rest.
So our advocate in that process would need to take a position.
And they could take the affirmative position while not, or a negative position. If
We'd have to direct our council which position to take.
Well, I think obviously, if we're not going to direct them to take the position that we don't have ownership of it, then why are we even talking about it?
Right.
I'm going to
We're just going to lay down, why would we spend a dime with anything?
Yeah.
Just say we own it and try to go get funding to fix something we don't own.
I agree
And
with
so
Marty.
we have an opinion from our attorney that says that he's fighting an uphill battle because the documentary evidence is all on the other side.
There's a lot of attorneys that fight uphill battles.
Well,
I deal with it every day of the week. That's what I base it on.
Right.
That's why I'm being swayed right now with what Dave's saying, because I'm listening impartially. I haven't made up my mind. I know what Kevin has told me. I know what the facts are surrounding that. But I understand and I'm listening to Dave's part of it, and that, because I don't know those histories. So those two things, in my mind, raise a doubt. When I have a doubt and I'm being expected to vote on something, we should remove the doubt. I don't have a vested interest in what that outcome will be.
Well, and I appreciate you supporting my opinion on it, Marty, but
Yes.
I think more so even what the mayor has just expressed.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Can I
Elliot,
ask?
I was just going to say, I mean, I came into this, I think probably closer to the mindset of, Kevin has already given us a legal standpoint from it. But yet here we are again for the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th meeting discussing this. So I would definitely support putting this thing to bed.
Yeah, I think it's a
And
good
let's
idea.
just be done with this part of the conversation at least.
Laura, can you share your opinion on what you think the IDNR will do if we get an opinion that says that they own it?
Nothing. Because there are other dams in the state of Illinois that have proven more dangerous than our dam, and so resources will be allocated to those more dangerous dams.
Could you expound on that by maybe saying in the immediate future? Because we don't know what tomorrow will bring.
Sure.
Yeah. And again, it'll go to the level of, just like intersections. The gruesome reality is that intersections get improved after fatalities. That's the priority list that the IDNR is going to work on. And there are other dams in the state that have had more fatalities than our dam has. So yes, one point in the future, we may jump up on the list, but I don't want to ever jump on the list for that reason.
Yeah.
I have a question. What if we get an attorney involved on this? Like everybody's, seems to be the way we're leaning towards. And the attorney
different
comes to us and says, yeah, if we're getting a legal opinion, and he says, we don't have a case.
I think that's where we stand right now, is the city attorney has said we have no
Because
case.
I think if an attorney looks at this and says, we don't have a case, I can't see somebody going to argue the issue.
Yeah.
So I think there's a couple of steps. There's a step tonight where you guys provide direction to staff as to which attorney you want us to go to, be that Kevin Drendel or an outside attorney, to then come back to you with that opinion. Then you guys make a second decision that evening to say, yes, let's go forward or let's not go forward.
Because-
those have to be decisions
Right.
you guys make.
If we spend the money or spend the time and effort to do that, and the attorney comes back and says, we don't have a case, are we going to be satisfied with that? Because we could be in the same boat again, arguing the same point.
And we've already.
Because Kevin's already given us an opinion.
Right.
Right.
Well, yeah, I mean, Kevin did and he didn't. I mean, he gave us his opinion. And, I mean, Marty, you're better at all this legal gumbo than I am, but it was an opinion. And when he gave us his opinion, I was sitting here and he was sitting there. And I said, but yet, Kevin, there's no documentation saying we own it, correct? And he said, well, yeah. So,
But again, the intent of the city council was to transfer ownership to the state, and that's the way it was written, discussed, and voted on in these council chambers. So if we're going to talk about intent, our intent was to turn over ownership of it, which meant and implied that we had it.
Well, but
No.
they can claim that they didn't take it because we didn't have ownership.
But that's not what they said. They told us they wouldn't take it because they didn't have funds and we didn't have any funds to help with it.
I think it's just what the mayor said just then, to an argument to you, Alan, is that we didn't have ownership, so we were giving easements. So all we gave to them was not ownership, we were not offering ownership, we gave easements. Here, you can access to work on it.
No.
That was it.
When we gave them access to work on it, that was back in the 70s. That was just the access. I'm talking about the early 2000s or mid 2000s, when we gave them, we were going to transfer ownership of the dam so they could remove it.
Did we do that, Jeff?
That's what we were intending to do.
It never happened.
It never happened.
All right. Well, I'm going to say this. I agree with what Marty was saying about safety, okay? I mean, we want to keep people safe. So I've been supporting the insurance stuff, and I've been supporting the lights, and I've been voting yes with somewhat of a guilty conscience because I've always been opposed to ownership of this dam, okay? And so, and I agree, we have to find out who owns the dam. And we have to do it, and nothing against present council, Kevin Drendel and Jansen Law Group, but, you know, when we had issues and we thought we had to fight for our electric utility and see what we can do, we went outside and we got a killer. Now, the killer couldn't help us, but we went and got a law firm. I mean, not that Kevin is a bad lawyer, but someone who does this every day, day and night, who goes out and fights, because we're talking large sums of money, and that's what I would propose to do. I'll continue to support safety for the residents, safety for anyone around the dam using the dam. But I do not support we own the dam, and I don't want to support that. I'd rather find out what the truth is. And not that IDNR is being less than truthful with us, or the state is being less than truthful with us, but they have been known to stretch it a bit for their own benefit. And so we as a municipality have to continue to push against the state government as we're doing with the LDF fund. So we need to get an attorney. He can make that decision for us, and it'll be, just a cold decision. It won't be heated as it is here, like say now, but we need to get that plan of action from someone who says we can win this, and this is how we're going to do it, to help us make our minds up.
I think we've proven with another 40-minute discussion that we need to move forward and get a definitive answer on who owns this. So I think you got direction.
And hiring an alternative firm is what I hear.
Well, we can look around.
Because I think we have an opinion from our attorney.
I would be open
A
to
second
Kevin's opinion on that if he knows an expert in the industry, in real estate or, whatever expert would be, but.
Probably an environmental law expert is basically what it's going to come down to. We can reach out.
Yeah.
I think that was what my intent was, not necessarily hiring another firm, but having Kevin draw up, present some options to us as to what would be the best course of strategy for it, because I don't want to also spend $200,000 on an outside firm to have them tell us, yes, it is, or no, it's not. Or I just want Kevin to come back with the.
Yeah, I'm confused in the direction because we were just asked to get a second opinion. In a second opinion scenario, you go to someone who suggests an expert in the field, and that expert in the field starts from scratch and just simply looks at all of the facts of the situation on their own and does the legal research and presents an opinion. But are you saying you want an initial step where Kevin lays out a strategy of how we might argue that we don't own the dam first before we go get a second opinion about whether we own the dam?
No, that was what I was initially proposing was, but if we can do the second opinion as more of an arbitration type of decision-making process, I would be okay with that.
How so? What would the
so that we're approaching whatever step that we do, we would be okay with that. If it's via a court, if it's via arbitration, if it's via a second opinion, if it's via Kevin figuring out what the strategy is, I just want to have, my direction would be to present to us what is the best strategy that we can resolve this and that we would be good with it. And if we come back and decide as a council that we're going to hire outside counsel, then we vote to do that. If we have Kevin come back and say, no, we could take a non-adversarial position and see if there is some sort of declaratory judgment out there. I don't know if those things exist in these circumstances, but I know when you have questionable ownership, there has to be case law out there as to when you've got disputed, because we find gold in that thing tomorrow, IDR is going to come back and say, we own the dam. I mean, we find oil, something along the lines where it's profitable or desirable for them to declare, oh yeah, no, our intent was to take it.
Okay.
Right now, they're not wanting to because there's a cost involved. We should be approaching it from the same point of view. There's a cost involved, and to Dave's point, if we're going to be spending the money, we need to be spending the money so that he doesn't have to hold his nose to do a vote.
So specifically, what is the direction to the city attorney?
Present a strategy to find definitive ownership, not opinion ownership.
Give us some options as to what would be the best course of strategy.
Mayor, you got an opinion on that? Jeff? You got an opinion on that?
So I have another question. Gary, please. I know, you said we had to insure the dam, and the insurance company said we had to take certain steps to insure the dam. And in your original, when you just started speaking this evening, you said something about, I just don't want to go down a rabbit hole with insurance companies, I suppose, is that we have to now maintain the dam or else to maintain our insurance.
The public safety aspect.
I think we have to maintain the
So
sign.
can Gary answer that, please?
It's the signage and lighting that we have to maintain.
Okay.
Laura explained it earlier that from the current day in 2018, as we stand here, as we had our conversation with them earlier this year, they're ranking the highest risk potential to the city as being this risk of pedestrians going over the dam and getting caught in the boil. If the dam were to structurally fail catastrophically, which right now there's no indication that that's how it would happen, the likelihood of downstream property damage is very small. We've actually seen that during really, really large rain events. The water's going over the dam, there's really no structural damage downstream. So they don't view that as a large liability. They view personal liability as a large liability, hence the reason for lighting and signage to warn the public of the hazard. That is then what we are tasked from. And I started all that by saying here in 2018. Internally as staff, we don't know come 2019 or 2020 whether the different adjusters on the phone with us what they might say. That's why we say in our memo that this idea of doing nothing and just forgetting about it and saying that, hey, we put up signs in 2018, we don't have to do anything more, probably isn't a viable long-term strategy.
So the viable long-term strategy is
Do something.
to do something, but we're not going to maintain the dam. It's try to come up with another course of action.
We've been told by the IDNR that we cannot take steps to structurally maintain the dam, to make repairs to the dam, which is what I would deem as maintenance. They view the dam as being failed, so taking activities on the dam to fill the breach would not be permitted.
Right. So other course of actions is we can't maintain the dam per IDNR. We can maintain the lighting and the signage.
So per IDNR has told us we could choose to submit for permits to reconstruct the dam. We could submit for permits to construct a different dam and take this dam
We're
down.
not going to do either one of those two,
Those are options, and that's a strategic.
but a viable option.
Well, those are all viable options. It's just those are strategic discussions that you guys have to decide on. There's two different sides here. From the insurance side, it's signage and lighting and warning the public of the potential hazard.
And that's it for insurance.
In 2018.
Today.
Yes, today.
And I think that, Mike, to your point, today, next year, they could come back and say, you've got to do this, you've got to take the affirmative. And that's what your point is saying. And yes, the highest risk right now is to preserve for fatalities, and we have taken care of that. The lower liability of property damage down the line, while we may not think it's that great, I handle claims every single day as to things that weren't anticipated. The only way to end this would be our best strategy of any liability is if we determine that we own it or we don't own it, because then we can make the sound decision making that we need to make moving forward.
Dave?
I'd like to see us move forward on this, I guess I could say. And I'd like to recap that by saying that was back in, 2002 that IDNR was in here? And they made their proposal on what they could do to remove the dam. And it went out to referendum and it failed to do that. At that point in time, then IDNR said, well, we're going to take our money and we're going to go on down to Yorkville because they're willing to have us come in and work on the dam in that town. But I'd say that the consensus is now, from what I'm hearing from this city council, is that we feel as though we need to protect our river walk and our pond. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is to make future plans for the inevitable failure of the existing dam that is holding the water back at this point in time. Therefore, I think we should continue to explore a way that we can protect our river walk and our ponding. We should work with staff, and staff should work with us to come up with some type of a coffer dam that would extend north to do that type of projection as what IDNR proposed back in 2002 to do. We should work on that in order to protect what we know is ours. In the meantime, I think we should also then go and hire an outside attorney that specializes in this type of litigation that could then give staff an idea on the cost and maybe a quick overview of what they think could or could not happen, and pursue that so we can come to some conclusion as Marty has discussed. But to do nothing is not the right answer. And I think the reason why I'm trying to be very careful about what I'm saying here is because I want it in the minutes that we're going forward with this with the thought that we need to preserve what we know is ours, and we need to determine the actual ownership of that dam.
So that's a second proposal, which instead of having Kevin Drendel create a strategy to find definitive ownership, not opinion ownership, Dave is proposing to hire a new firm and have them give us a proposal to determine ownership of the dam.
I'll second that.
So does that, say another firm comes and says,
You own it.
you don't own it. Now what? Is that going to solve the problem? Or are we still going to be, well, I believe Kevin, and I believe Then we get into
Well,
a.
that-
So do we have to go to two firms and get, we got to get an odd number?
If that firm renders the opinion that they don't believe the city owns it and that they can defend that, then I would assume that council would then authorize that firm to proceed forward and write a letter or do something with the state to get before, as Marty says, a judge to get that issue ironed out.
And to your point, Tony, that might determine that, let's just say we all of a sudden, everybody's acknowledged and proven that IDNR owns it and we don't. That doesn't mean that they're going to magically come in here tomorrow with $18 million and do what we want done. But at least we've gotten that part of it done so that if we have to do something, to Marty's point, we've got a basis to work off of, or we can then at least go to IDNR and say, it's been determined that it's yours. Step up and accept your responsibility. I don't know where it would go, but I think we got to get to that point.
I think there was a third proposal. Sorry, I think there was a third proposal in there too, and that was, I think you were advocating continuation of engineering planning at this stage.
Right.
I still think, we have to continue on to do whatever we're going to eventually do with what maintains the pond. My thought has always been to try to take whatever we do to take the dam out, to use that, to try to make it, as green as possible, to try to do that. The one thing that I will remind everybody, if you go back and look at the plan that was given to the city from IDNR, they actually put more yards of concrete back in the river than they took out. You have to go back and look at that plan because they put in a bunch of jetties and different wing dams, and a lot of structure goes back into the river in the plan that they came up with then, which I don't think is something that we want.
You got some public here.
Okay.
Is there, does the insurance company feel that the dam is less safe now, given the breach, than it has been in the past? Because
The insurance company's first experience with the dam was when we did the inspection report, which was back in November of 2016. So they're only looking at it from that standpoint, and they're still working with the same report. So in their minds, I don't think that they are aware of any changes over that period of time.
well, I mean, we haven't had, maybe we have, to my knowledge, we haven't had real serious accidents there. Though they're saying it isn't safe, and just putting lights and signage up isn't taking care of the problem. We say we're taking care of the problem and making it safe, but we're really not at this point.
We're notifying the public of a hazard.
Right,
Okay, but we're not fixing the hazard, right?
right.
Okay.
But we are taking proactive steps.
Well, as long as we go ahead, no, I agree with that, but to just sit on it isn't making it safe, so. Whether or not we own it or not. I mean, if IDNR owns it and nothing happens, they do nothing with it. We're sitting here with something that's not safe in the center of our community, and I have a problem with that.
Well, it's a river. It's never going to be safe.
It's been there for 100 years.
Right.
So-
It has.
So all
put
we
up-
can do is do what we can do, so, you know.
Do we have members in the public that wanted to talk?
Yvonne, Carl? Use the mic.
You use the mic, we'll lean up.
Yvonne Digley. I used to work for a reclamation organization, and it's my understanding.
Can you pull a mic?
Okay. It's my understanding that the Corps of Engineers controls all of the waterways. And I remember when this river walk was put in, I made a complaint because it's truly a river walk a lot of the times. You can't have to wade in the river to use the walk. And I was told, well, that was the Corps of Engineers. Have you approached the Corps of Engineers about the dam? Because they do control the waterway. What
Yes.
did they say?
So they are working in cooperation with the IDNR on a project to remove all of the dams along the
Okay.
Fox River. But they are looking to the IDNR as the lead agency on that.
Yeah, well, then it's not our responsibility, because if the Corps of Engineers controls the waterways and they're working in conjunction with the IDNR. If there's an accident that happens, IDNR is responsible for it. We don't own the waterway, and we don't own the dam. And we're supposed to get permits to put anything in the water. The Corps of Engineers controls the water.
In the fatality cases that I'm familiar with against both the City of Geneva and the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, that the City of Geneva was able to get themselves out of that case by showing that it was the IDNR that was the owner of the dam. So it's not the Army Corps of Engineers that becomes the responsible party when there are fatalities in the boil of a dam. It's the dam owner who becomes responsible.
And again, we don't own the dam. There's no proof that we own it, and IDNR is controlling, and the Corps of Engineers is controlling, so I believe that takes us off the hook legally. I may be wrong,
I think
but
we'll go get that legal opinion, because I certainly am not qualified to make that judgment.
Well, as from all the reclamation we did the Grand Coulee Dam and some of the western states and all of those things. Corps of Engineers and Bureau of Reclamation controlled those waterways, and ownership was not vested in the city or any of the other things. Not Illinois Department of the Bureau of Reclamation, Department of Interior. So.
Who controls what can be done in a certain area and who has property rights in that same area might be two different things. So the Army Corps of Engineers does have control over the waterway, and thus a property owner who wants to do something would have to apply for permits in order for the Army Corps of Engineers to sign off as to whether that can or cannot be done.
Well, right, you can own the property up to the river, but the actual river is not owned by it's controlled by the Department of Natural Resources or the Bureau of Reclamation or the Department of Interior.
So the city of Batavia, it owns to the center of the river, but the Army Corps of Engineers controls what can be done with the river. So there are property rights that extend right into the river.
I thought it was right up to the property, but I'd have to relook.
Okay.
I'd have to look it up again.
We dealt with that with a piece of property 2 blocks south of here when we were doing a grant for it. The property ownership is out into the river on that property, the one on either side of it, it ends at the river. That's the way it was written in the deeds. And some of them are into the river, some aren't. We dealt with that all the way north of here when they were looking at what it would cost to get all the property rights, or what would happen to the property that's created when you take the dam out. So there's a ton of questions legally, and it all goes back to what was on the deeds of the property owners all the way up the river.
Carl?
Carl Dinwiddie, 1156 Pine Street. And I may be splitting hairs here, but we need to find a damn attorney, that's for sure. But I would ask the question differently. Instead of about ownership, my question would be, who is responsible for this dam? That's what I would like them to answer. Not so much about who owns it or doesn't, who's responsible for it. And as Dave said, what's the case law about it, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you.
Anybody else on this? Or are we done?
It's the decision that we're going to hire the new firm, a dam attorney, and have them give us a proposal to determine both ownership and responsibility issues.
So ask them for a proposal on what their costs would be to go through something like that? Because I think that that's something we also ought to be thinking about, because if we're going to talk about $100,000, $200,000 to go through something like this that might take a year to come up with an answer, is that really something we need to do? I mean, I think back to Lucy's point is this is something that we might want to have control of. Because if the state doesn't and can't, does it just sit there and deteriorate over the next 20 years?
Well, I think you're going to have to, I think staff's going to have to do a little bit of research again, I'm speaking, I don't know, Marty, you know more than I do on this. Staff's going to have to do a little bit of research as to what kind of an attorney and what attorney you'd hire. And in doing so, you probably would have to have some conversation with them about what it is that we'd even be hiring them for. I mean, anybody can give you a proposal, and it's going to be so much an hour, and I don't know how much it's going to cost you. So they're going to have some history given to them about what it is that we're discussing
Right.
in order to be able to give you something
Right.
solid that we can even discuss.
That's how we would proceed anyway.
Everybody good with that? I'm done.
Planning efforts, engineering,
Keep moving.
that effort also?
That should definitely be done. I think we definitely need to explore the possibility of the IDOT side for engineering.
It'll all be in the big picture of the plan.
You know, in that big picture, because I think that that's just a way to try to help pay for that, especially at the engineering side of it. And two, if you've got money coming from IDOT and they're, I guess, in the somewhat same boat as the Army Corps of Engineers, that it may be easier to try to get some of that permitted. So if they're kind of on board with what we're trying to do.
I also wanted to bring up that the Batavia Park District and their board would be interested in getting back together with City Council just to kind of regroup as to where things are at. And they are currently, I think, engaging in a master plan, and part of that being future plans for the river. So I was wondering if perhaps we wanted to do that sometime in July.
I think it's a good idea, but I think we ought to let you guys do a little bit of research with attorneys, because I think that's something that they should also be involved in too, or at least abreast to, and whether or not they chose to be a participant. But maybe get that conversation going first before we meet with the Park District, so it can all be discussed.
Okay.
You guys agree?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, that's it?
Thank you.
We're good, Gary? Laura?
Yes.
Okay. Next item, discussion on the Wilson Street concrete utility pole structure assessment results. Alderman O'Brien.
Okay, staff, I guess, engaged engineering company Middo. They went through, on Wilson Street, we have concrete poles. They went through 80, we own 81 poles. And they went through every one of them, and they had 6 classifications. There's the west side and the south and the east side. I guess there are 2 types of poles, Gary, the stress-crete and the, what would that be, the Centricon? And the Centricon was fabricated in 83. The stress-crete was fabricated between 96 and 2001. We have 51 of those poles. Looks like there's deterioration happening substantially in 24 of those poles. You're talking about possibly replacing and going from there, you know, talking about purchasing, repairing. It's in the 92-page memo, so I'll leave you from there.
Read all 92 pages?
Yes, I did.
Originally, we thought this would be concrete repairs. I mean, they do surface repairs to concrete all the time. Originally, that's kind of what we thought we were contemplating in order to preserve these poles. We felt it was more of a preservation type project. Then one of them got hit at the northwest corner of Wilson and Redant and caused us concern based on what we saw basically through structural failure of that pole, destructive analysis, if you will, unintentional structural demolition of that pole. So we went to council. We basically informed you of that at that time, at least verbally, that we were going to retain the services of an engineer, which we did. As Alderman O'Brien just said, they went through and did a complete analysis. They came away with recommendations, definite poles that needed to be replaced, some poles that could be repaired or replaced, and then other poles that needed to be monitored. The poles that needed to be repaired or replaced would be not the types of preservation repairs we had originally contemplated, but they were rather structural repairs. After we reached out to that structural repair company, they were willing only offer a 1-year warranty on their work. Obviously, we're in this for the long term, so we wanted to get something more definitive. Stress-crete manufacturer now offers a lifetime warranty on their poles, which they did not offer originally back when the poles originally were installed. So for $2,000 to $3,000 per pole, we can get them structurally repaired with a 1-year warranty. And for roughly $5,000 per pole, we can get a brand-new pole with a lifetime warranty. So that's what staff is recommending, is that we actually proceed forward with replacement of the 24 poles that were identified at around approximately $5,000 apiece. So that, if you run the math, it's about $125,000 of poles to proceed forward. We do not have this work specifically identified in the budget, and probably will likely need to come back to you at the end of the year for a budget amendment once we see how the overhead budget will work out. But we are recommending and seeking your concurrence to proceed forward right now to get these poles replaced using in-house staff this year.
Okay, any questions for Gary? Any comments, Marty?
I just have a question on the one that was damaged. Is that being replaced with?
It already was. Yeah, we have 2 or 3 spares in the yard. So we have some spares in the yard, and that was already replaced.
But the cost for that, is that going to be borne by the automobile liability policy?
It was a hit and run.
Oh.
So, and the police department was given some direction as to who may have done it, and I have never heard back. I believe that they've ran that to ground and not found who may have done it.
Anyone else? Dave?
So Gary, if you go through with this, would our crews then be taking down the old ones and putting up the new when they have time, or?
Correct. Yep.
So we're not going to be going out for a subcontractor then to?
No, this would be done with in-house crews. And Brian's on board. Brian knows the scope of this work and has his crews available between now and the end of the year.
I think it needs to be done.
Yeah, and the ones that are really bad, those are the first ones?
Those will be the first ones we
9
tackle.
or whatever.
Correct.
Those, that's kind of scary looking.
If you saw the report, some of them are a little concerning, yes.
So Gary, with the poles, the Centricon, we're going to discontinue using those, I would presume, because their warranty isn't lifetime either.
Correct. They still
Right.
don't offer a lifetime warranty.
And so if we're replacing any of those poles, we'll replace them with the stress street?
That is correct.
Okay.
And we will be able to get the new poles with the same bolt pattern. There'll be a couple of poles, to Alderman Wolf's point, there'll be a couple of poles that failed both from a structural and a condition aspect.
Right.
And those couple of poles that failed on both aspects will actually need to be replaced with direct bury poles, not a foundation. And those poles will be larger and beefier in size and be direct buried, and that's how those poles will be addressed. The poles that aren't failing from a structural standpoint but are only failing from a condition standpoint can go right back on the same foundations and just be rebolted to the old foundations.
So we did talk a couple years ago, a few years back, about sealing
Right.
those poles.
And that was what we were thinking we were going to get into.
Right, and we never
And
did
after
do
seeing
that.
After seeing the pole on the northwest corner of Verdant and Wilson, we suddenly said this is not a restoration project, this is
Right.
a structural project.
So we don't need, if we start buying these new ones, we shouldn't have to worry about sealing them 8 feet up because the damage is really through salt.
The damage is essentially through salt. When steel corrodes, it expands to 10 times its original size. So steel begins to corrode with moisture. As it corrodes, it expands. As it expands, it pops off the concrete, exposes more steel, more moisture, more expansion. So the process continues, and that's what you see in some of these photos.
So the stress screed, we don't have to seal them. They have.
Stress-Creed gives us a lifetime
Perfect.
warranty on them.
So one last thing. Does anybody else have anything?
I'm seeing this, and I'm not disputing that those poles need obvious replacement. You're seeing the rebar underneath getting exposed here. But this is $120,000 that's unbudgeted, in a year that, and I'm sorry to beat a dead horse, but, we're already looking at a tight budget. We're already making sacrifices, and we still don't know where the city is projected to be. So undertaking $120,000 in unbudgeted amount of work, is this truly, we must get this done this fiscal year? I realize there's no definitive that you can predict in the future of what's going to happen here, but is this better served as we need to make sure this is a first thing 2019?
I personally think the liability is such that you need to address it.
Okay.
And this is electric reserves, right? If we were to go into that to pay for this, this isn't out of general fund. This is electric reserves. So again, we got to remember that we have the enterprise funds that are for separate utilities.
I respect that.
And I get your point. I really do get your point.
But I'll to Elliot's point and to your point, we do have to watch that electric reserve. We have to keep our eye on that.
Yep.
And so can we pare that down at all? Because I know some of them are moderately, some are severe, some are less severe, some are kind of moderate monitoring. And so can we maybe do half and then?
Well, that's why they set it up this way. We're definitely starting with those first 9, and then as time permits throughout the remainder of the year, we'd like to start tackling those those remaining 15. That's exactly why they set it up that
Right.
way. And then there's still, another 18 and another 39, so that's 57 of them that we're not going to do anything with.
Right.
We're just going to monitor them going forward.
So, and one last comment, I noticed, I went through them and I saw on one of them, it was okay, it was the blue, it had 1 rating, I think, number 1 rating, but there was a crack at the bottom. So how did they determine this? I mean, did they use an X-ray or anything to determine the concrete, the
soundness of the concrete?
Yes, thank you.
So, I mean, they did sound them, because you can sound, if you're familiar with
Right.
construction, you know how to sound concrete. They did sound them, and they also used, the name just trapped out of my head, what's the name of the Osmos? The Osmos is actually a company, but they actually also have a proprietary method for establishing the structural integrity of the pole. And that method is used by other companies, so they've used that method too to establish the structural integrity of the pole as well, based on the conditions observed and the Osmos formulas. So
these, like the little cracks like they talked about, doing actual like recaulking and a higher grade of caulk, waterproof caulking and stuff, and these little cracks, they'll probably epoxy them or do something?
That then gets into a second step, and sometimes with poles, sometimes with concrete in general, if you seal up the bottom of them, you're actually trapping moisture inside of them. It's the reason why you got weep holes sometimes in windows, because you actually want that moisture to fall down and out.
Like a masonry building.
So, I mean, I only go by the judgment of the structural engineer who looked at that crack and said, this crack is superficial and not structural.
Okay, and that's the point I was getting, like they did their due diligence.
Yes.
All right, Dave?
Gary, you said we've got some of these in stock?
No, we had a couple in the yard as spares, which we always have, trying to have spares of everything we have.
Okay, so we pretty much exhausted our spares.
We would only keep a couple spares to begin with, yeah.
What's the lead time on these?
Brian, I don't know the exact lead time in weeks, but I know Brian's already been in touch with Strishkri to get them. That's how we know this different methodology on this larger poles.
So to, I guess, Elliot's point, you're going to fit this in between everything else our 11-man electrical crew is doing.
Right.
So we don't need to go out and buy 20 of them now. We could buy 10, and then if we see we have more time, we could buy 10 more.
And that's how we're going to approach it. But I mean, right now, Brian's still pretty confident that we can get all 24 done this year.
Okay.
It's only 24 poles.
All right, anybody else comments or questions for Gary? There's no action taken on this, right?
There's really no formal action, it's just concurrence for us, because your formal action is going to have to come in the form of a budget amendment at some point in the future, based on kind of where we land at the end of the year.
Okay. Thank you, Gary.
Okay, moving on then to item number 9, which is project status. Laura?
Heard about a lot of projects at last night's city council meeting, but I just wanted to let you know that this week we will be publishing the report from the community survey, which will be both this year's results as well as a comparison back to the 2010 results. And then also just a reminder that on next Monday, June 11th at 7:00 p.m. at the East Side Firehouse is going to be our next meeting, and we'll go over the results of your survey on the prioritization of those SWOT items. I've done some preliminary looking at the results, and there is some coalescing of opinion about what some of those major items are. So I'll try to get that out to you as soon as possible so you can give that some thought before we get to our meeting. Hopefully the result of that meeting, we will come up with some major areas where we want to put our resources and efforts over the course of the next 3 to 5 years. Let's see, other things that I didn't mention yesterday. Nope, that's it.
That's it?
Yeah.
Anybody have anything for Laura? Any questions?
I've got another.
Okay, we'll go to item 9, others.
I just wanted to bring to your attention and make you aware of the fact that every year we're required by law to publish a consumer confidence report for our water utility. That report outlines all the steps that we take to ensure that we have a safe water system, and it also details the results of testing that we're required to perform. This report is published in the Neighbors magazine and is again sent out to every address and anyone who is serviced by our water utility. Jeremy Barkey, our water superintendent, actually received a letter in the mail last week from the IDNR. And usually sometimes when you get a letter from the IDNR, you don't quite know what it's going to say. But he opened it up and actually was a personal letter written to him commending him on the quality of the CCR report and stating that the IDNR would like to use this report as a template and an example for other communities to use. So it was a very nice letter for Jeremy to acknowledge how good of quality this report was, and I just wanted to report that to you guys.
Thanks, Gary.
Excellent.
That's awesome. They can have those rights if they take the dam.
Nice.
Okay, does anybody else have another?
I do, Dave.
Yeah.
We had talked earlier, I think it was right after it was downstate, that we were going to sign on to the, I'll call it the Yorkville Initiative for Suicide Prevention for September. I just got the email today from Joel with the wording for that proclamation, so I'll get that to the mayor and we'll get that set up for a council meeting in the future.
Absolutely.
And I think he's now up to about 100 cities.
That's great.
So it's just.
And we already took care of it, your thing today.
Okay.
Upstairs.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, we do have an executive session for the purpose of probable litigation, so I need a motion.
So moved.
Motion by O'Brien, second by
Second.
Callahan, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, there won't be anything coming out of this.
No.
Okay.